South Africa's youth unemployment figures paint a grim picture 45 years after the 1976 youth uprising. The latest quarterly labour force survey statistics confirm this shocking reality. 3 out of every 4 South Africans between the ages of 15 and 24 who want a job cannot find one. For those between the ages of 25 and 34, things are comparatively better, yet still the worst there have ever been. That's more than half of them that are unemployed, 51.4%. And Bernstein is the Executive Director, Centre for Development and Enterprise. Thank you so much for joining us. And so just tackling this crisis by accelerating labour-intensive growth, some say that has to be the country's highest priority. We've been speaking for the past year that COVID has been an impediment for a lot of these programs, but it definitely does not start with COVID-19.
Look, South Africa has had a deepening unemployment crisis prior to COVID-19, and around 10 million people and rising in January 2020, and the situation has only got worse. And that's why we've started using the word catastrophe rather than crisis, because if you're a young person in South Africa today, this really is no country for young people. Your chances of getting a job are really minuscule. And unless we do something different and profoundly different from what we've been doing, the situation is going to keep getting worse. So we have to change the way we're thinking about our economy to make sure that we're getting jobs for the young people we have, the vast majority of whom have not come out of a good school through no fault of their own and have no work experience and come from families and communities where nobody is working. And
I want to just talk about the reality that we're facing now. If youth have been frustrated because it's said that the work environment or the labour force seems to be hostile towards the youth, are we seeing a large drop of the number of youth who are actually still going out there looking for work, or are they becoming even more and more discouraged?
Look, I think it's hard to say what's happened during COVID because of lockdowns and so on, but we know that the moment the economy turns and you start getting more growth and a few more opportunities, you will get discouraged people starting to come back into the workforce. But the real issue is that there are just millions and millions of young people today who are desperate to work, never mind the discouraged ones. We have a really weak education system that is failing young people in large measure. We have one of the worst performing education systems in the world. And then we have an economy which incentivizes employers to use machinery rather than labor in almost every instance. And we need to change the direction in which this country is going, both in terms of creating more jobs for the workforce we actually have, and in seriously grasping the nettle of moving the performance of our basic education system significantly up.
I mean, we've been talking a day before June 16, and it is said that upward social mobility is related to education, and employment is a form of education and training. So how will young workers be provided with the knowledge, the skills, the discipline and the network, or even other capabilities to be able to find employment or some sort of progress in terms of their hopes and dreams?
Well, that's the reality, and that's why we're saying this is such a desperate situation. People in work learn all sorts of things, and that's why Paul Romer, Nobel Economics laureate, has called work as school. It gives young people a second chance to get the disciplines and know-how and all sorts of things that those of us in employment take for granted. So even in a very basic job, you're learning things on that job. And if you're unemployed year after year after year, you become less employable. So you lose the skills you have, you lose connection with people. So this is a terrible situation that we've created in South Africa, and we have to adopt new policies, bold ideas on how we're going to create jobs for people on the scale that South Africa requires.
So what would be a plausible strategy when you talk about policy reform that is urgently required?
Well, we're saying two things. We have put forward a number of modest policy reforms to the labour market, to collective bargaining, that at present is disadvantageous for smaller firms and new firms, where people sitting around a table engaging in bargaining can then do a deal and extend it to all sorts of firms who were not part of that deal. So we're saying that needs to change. We're also suggesting that the country introduce one policy experiment zone, a special economic zone for economic activity. We're suggesting in the Eastern Cape at Coega, where there's already sunk investment. We have an underutilized port, and we're saying let's make this an area for labor-intensive manufacturing, which has happened in many other countries and has helped many other countries get people into the workforce. We're saying let's try this out with some modest changes to the labor market regime. Let's try something different. Let's see if we can attract investors in labor-intensive manufacturing. We think we can be globally competitive if we introduce the expanded tax incentive for all workers in this zone and a few other changes. And we think that could be a really constructive new approach to breaking the policy logjam in South Africa, where because of our history, because of a whole lot of things, we're stuck in this gridlock and this paralysis where many people in the ruling alliance don't want to change the labor market.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Anne Bernstein, who is the Executive Director at the Centre for Development and Enterprise. 20 bodies believed to be that of